All right. Welcome, everyone, to the K-12 Climate Action Commission listening session. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, commissioners, for making time for this conversation. Thank you to our guests for the wisdom they will share. And of course, thank you to all of the folks who are joining us for today's conversation. We certainly gather at a moment of crisis on multiple levels as a country. We have the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that has had on folks' health and well-being, as well as on our economy. We have the crisis that has been with us from the beginning as a country of systemic racism that we continue to grapple with and have had this moment of national reckoning. We have the crisis around our democracy and these attacks on democracy and on the right to vote and the meaning of elections. And so we have all of these challenges that we're navigating alongside the existential threat of climate change. And sometimes folks react to crisis by shutting down, but we're having this conversation because our reaction to crisis has to be to get to the heart of the matter, to try to meet the challenge. But it also requires us to be resilient and to think about how we help folks navigate the impact of crisis. And in this case, today's conversation will focus on how we help school communities, students, families, educators navigate the impact of the climate change crisis, which is already having dire effects from the fires in the West to the hurricanes in the Southeast to flooding in my home state of Maryland. With K-12 Climate Action, we're going to be very specific about what schools and school communities can do to address climate change and to address issues of environmental justice. This is one in a series of listening sessions where we try to learn from folks who are doing the real work on the ground. And I'm excited to welcome everyone to the conversation. Governor Whitman.
Well, thank you, Secretary King. And again, congratulations or thank you to everyone who's part of this. And really congratulations to the Aspen Institute for putting this together, because this is forward thinking. This is not just reacting to a crisis, although Lord knows, as the Secretary pointed out, we have enough of them. And many of them do revolve around the issue of climate change. But the whole point of these discussions is to be able to provide the incoming administration with some ideas and suggestions about how to be proactive, because we know that the Biden-Harris administration has made climate change one of their 4 major principles. And we're very lucky today. We have an outstanding panel, but of course, Aspen's been able to bring together an outstanding panel every time. So I am actually feeling very good about the way we have started these discussions and the kinds of recommendations we might be able to offer to the incoming administration. I think we have a special pleasure today. We get to have Congressman Corbello to introduce our first panelist. And Congressman, I will turn it over to you to introduce Alberto Cavallo.
Well, first, let me thank our co-chairs for indulging me by allowing me to introduce someone who I know as a great leader in education, but more importantly to me as a friend, someone who I know at a personal level. Someone who has dedicated the last about 10 months of his life primarily to feeding the most vulnerable children in our community. Of course, this pandemic has been so challenging for everyone, but especially for low-income families. And our superintendent here in Miami-Dade County has been doing extraordinary work for over a decade, leading the 4th largest school district in America. But I think in particular, during these trying times, as the Secretary outlined, the difficulty of the times we're living, the superintendent has been a source of hope, of opportunity, of light for a lot of families in our community. This is a superintendent who has had our schools open here since early October, would have been September had he had it his way. The schools have been open safely, but they've been open because the superintendent understands that for many of our children here in South Florida, school is home. School is where children have breakfast, where they have lunch, where they get their sense of routine, where they are supported and nurtured. And he took some significant political risk, but really did everything he could to make sure that our schools are open. And these are, when you look at large school districts in the country, I think Miami-Dade is an exception these days in terms of the access that children have to our schools. And but even before this pandemic, this is a man who has turned around our school district. This school district 10 years ago was bankrupt, not just financially, but also morally. And, you know, I had the privilege of being a partner to him for 4 years when I served on the school board here. And I learned so much from him. We worked so well together. And, you know, during dark times like these, leaders like Alberto really shine, and we're reminded of how a small number of people can make such a great difference. So, Mr. Superintendent, my friend, I'm grateful to you for your time. I know you have a lot of competing priorities these days, and for you to dedicate a little bit of time to having a conversation with my distinguished colleagues on this board with the Aspen Institute, another one of those organizations in our country that we look toward for guidance, for light. We're just very grateful to you, and happy to turn it over to you and to start this important conversation about climate change, a challenge that, although seems small compared to some of the things we're dealing with today, cannot be ignored at all as we continue to seek solutions. So thanks again, Alberto.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, Superintendent, for being part of this. Another speaker that we have, Dr. Victor Carrion, is a professor of child and adolescent psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine, where he directs the Stanford Early Life Stress and Resiliency Program. After Hurricane Maria, he helped to train over 1,000 school mental health professionals in Puerto Rico. So we welcome him as well to the panel. And now I'll turn it back to Secretary King.
Thanks, Governor. We are also joined by Michael Rose Revelair, who is a science educator at the Ivana Eudora Kane High School in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. She was named Teacher of the Year in her district in 2019 and has played an instrumental role in helping her school become an eco school. So excited to hear from Ms. Revelair. And we also are joined by Laura Capps, who is the president of the Santa Barbara School Board. And she's led an effort there to make solar schools a key part of their energy resilience strategy in the school district and in the community of Santa Barbara. So excited to hear from Ms. Capps about the experience in Santa Barbara. And we will begin with Superintendent Carvalho. I've had the privilege of spending time with him in his district and seeing firsthand his exceptional leadership. So great to have you here, Superintendent, and we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Secretary King. Let me begin by thanking the very kind introduction provided by my dear friend, former school board member, and Congressman Carlos Corbell. Indeed, the times that we led together in this district will be forever unmatched for me in terms of delivery of high educational opportunities for all of our students. Let me also thank the Aspen Institute and Secretary King and Governor Whitman for your leadership on this critically important conversation and an initiative. Look, I think it cannot be ignored that our location here in South Florida provides ample opportunities to execute processes and procedures to prepare for the climate change that our entire globe is experiencing. Obviously, the most direct threat and consequence as a result of that climate change is the intensification in terms of strength, but also frequency of hurricanes that batter the southeastern coast of the US, particularly the Miami-Dade community. We all recall Andrew, but we've had many other instances where there have been tangible threats to our community. However, I believe, and I think my colleagues here believe, that the greatest defense long-term against climate threats is to really educate our students about local and global environments. So there are short-term actions that we can and must take, and those need to be led locally, supported statewide, and supported federally. But there's also a local responsibility that puts front and center the opportunity to educate our students at all levels, at the elementary level, the recognition of the importance of climate, plants, and animals. At the middle school level, displaying the interactions amongst the Earth's spheres and identifying the impact that human beings have on Earth, and construct a scientific model that demonstrates how matter and energy constantly transfer between organisms. That's exactly what we do. And then at the senior high school level, a more complex conversation that brings into it the political actions that can be taken to actually address this issue at the state, national, and international levels. And as a district, we believe that this is the appropriate environment for us to, in fact, have the longer lasting impact, is to have a curriculum that stresses the importance of climate change through an action-driven approach. Equally important are the partnerships that we have with local universities and informal institutions like philanthropic entities. So the Dream in Green Challenge is well and alive in our school system, providing K-12 students with an opportunity to actually have immersive experiences in climate-related topic elements in our school system. The Fairchild Garden Challenge. This is an award-winning interdisciplinary environmental science competition designed to stimulate the interest of our students, again, pre-K through 12th grade. Then the Everglades Foundation. This is a literacy program that focuses not on students, but on teacher training and curriculum development to improve the understanding of this important and rich topic through, again, interdisciplinary techniques focused on environmental stewardship. And again, this is a K-12 topic. Now, as a school system for the better part of 50 years, 60 years, we have been the recipients of students displaced as a result of extreme weather events, as a result of social political disruptions in a Caribbean basin, Central and South America. But I can tell you that aside from the Cuban diaspora and the Haitian diaspora, extreme weather has been the main reason as to why children arrive in significant waves. I'll give you one example. The hurricane that battered Puerto Rico. Two events that resulted in thousands of students coming to the state of Florida, many of them to Miami, and their educators as well. So we have processes, robust processes in place that were, quite frankly, designed as a result of our preparation for hurricanes to deal with the instant influx of students in a manner that, quite frankly, minimizes the bureaucratic process for student enrollment, the certification process for teachers who may come from areas like Puerto Rico, certification processes that are accelerated and expedited. And the way we, quite frankly, accelerate the process of enrollment depends on the rate of influx of students. So there's one model that's a trickle effect. And this happens if the flow is steady but slow. And then student registration takes place at every single school, 466 sites in single and small groups. We identify the needs of the students. We ensure that they are quickly interviewed along with their guardians or parents for English language limitations or special needs, disabilities, so that the intervention and the acceleration toward learning potential is in place. The second model really relies on establishing 1 to 3 centers to register students into the system based on a much faster rate of arrival. There, the students receive immunization. We have the Department of Health there to assist in that process and again, cut through the red tape and allows us the integration into the system in a much faster way through these reception centers, 1 to 3, depending on the severity of the influx. And then obviously model 3. And this one we have not experienced in a bit. This one is reserved for full service school, it being established to serve these students. And this would happen if we really get an influx of hundreds to thousands of students per week. Then it makes more sense to actually have these students in specialized schools to provide a rapid integration into our school system. Obviously, we to us, both sides of the coin are important. Academic preparation, but side by side with social emotional support and mental health support, considering the trauma that these children arrive with after living through a hurricane disruption or an earthquake in Haiti. Lastly, the last minute or so, I'd like to speak a little bit about what we need in terms of supports at the federal level or at the state level. We believe that in addition to educating our students on climate change and employing procedures for effective response and registration, districts can and must implement measures in their districts to reduce a carbon footprint. But there have to be federal and state incentives for us to get there. There have to be means by which there are investments so that the cost of an electric bus, for example, is not 3 times the cost of a standard diesel bus. And so that's why we're thankful that through legal action, we are beneficiaries of the Volkswagen benefit and initiative, where we are in the process of acquiring 50 electric buses through an incentive obtained through a settlement that basically covers the delta between a traditional diesel fuel bus and electric bus. But we need to do more. There have to be incentives for LED lighting replacement, for high efficiency air conditioning system replacement, for motion sensor operated light fixtures. Centralized energy management systems should be a mandate for all school systems, where there's a rapid adaptation to the changing conditions outside of buildings, so that there are natural conservation opportunities in place. Last but not least, high solar reflectance roofing system incentives, so that every single roof on top of every single school in America can actually have a federally supported, state incentivized solar system that reduces our consumption of the traditional carbon fuels. And last but not least, I would say that I would strongly continue to encourage incentives also for LEED certified buildings. And we passed a $1.2 billion construction referendum in 2012, and we made a decision to employ LEED certification moving forward, obviously to benefit us from an energy consumption, but simultaneously to alleviate the pressures on the environment. So I stand ready to entertain the questions, and thank you once again for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Superintendent Carvalho. And we will turn now to Dr. Carrion.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank the Aspen Institute, Governor Whitman, and all of you for having me be part of this panel. It's an honor to share this panel with my panel members. If I could have the first slide, please. Next slide. I've been in the field of child psychiatry now for over 25 years, and I have never seen such an increased need for access as we currently have. Half of the children to really 2/3 of them that need mental health services are not getting it or getting suboptimal care. Why is this? Well, the number of stressors and the numbers of traumas that are occurring, like we're talking today, are happening more frequently, but they don't exist in isolation. They really accumulate and they form what we call an allostatic load. This is the weight that we all carry with our experiences. And there's a physiological cost to that weight. Think of it as a backpack, right? We can carry some weight and we can carry some amount of stress, some amount of trauma. We have that flexibility. But after a while, if that bag gets too heavy and you're very young, it is very easy then to fall backwards. In 2021, more than 70 million children in America have been exposed to this global pandemic. And it's not only the pandemic, as we all know, there's secondary stressors and secondary trauma that comes from that. Interruption of the education, separation from family members, which really means loss of their support system, which is one of the most important factors to build resilience. We'll talk about that in a minute. A significant amount of children also were exposed to wildfires, floods, storms, leading to loss of property, loss of life. And this is all on top of other traumatic events that may or may not be related to climate change, but as I mentioned, they are part of that allostatic load. The violence that we have experienced for racial injustices and the political divides, and other personal traumas that families have that are their own individual traumas, such as unemployment and loss of life. So what do we do? Next slide, please. What we need to do is we need to build resilience, and not only resilience, which is a physics term, meaning that you bounce back to the position where you were. But sometimes we can even do better. We can have adaptation. We can actually bounce to a different place where we are better positioned than we were before to what will happen in the future. Now, contrary to popular belief, children are not born being resilient. There's nothing inherent in children that make them resilient. They're actually vulnerable. That's why we take care of them. Resilience has to be built. We have to take care of the children and give them the opportunity to build this resilience. We do that through the strengthening of their support system, the strengthening of their families, the resources that we provide educators. For example, when Hurricane Maria happened in Puerto Rico, the training of 2,000 educators really allowed us to be able to reach many of the children. When we went to Haiti after the earthquake in Haiti, what we learned there is that the earthquake was one of the last experiences they wanted to talk about because they had so many other experiences they wanted to talk about. So we need to strengthen families, we need to strengthen educators, their support system, and build on that connectedness that is very important for resilience, a connectedness that's related to a sense of belonging and a sense of community. We also need to increase the coping tools that kids may have themselves. The first thing kids want to know is that they're secure, that they're safe, but also that those that are going to be taking care of them are competent and feel capable of providing that safety. That requires communication, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but children get empowered through knowledge. So there's no information that we're discussing today, for example, that children should not know. We should actually give them this information, and we do that through communication at every level, at the family level, at the school level, at the society level, and of course, the protection. The healthy strategies that we do involve treatment, access, like I mentioned before, and we need to really develop methods in which we can actually reach more children than the ones we're currently reaching. Technology can help with that, and also working with other individuals that are not necessarily in the health field, but can also provide some of this treatment and some of this prevention. And I'll give an example of that in a minute, but basically recognizing the problem early and intervening early. Next slide, please. So in terms of communication, what do kids want to know? When we talk with kids, we need to be clear, we need to be direct, we need to be succinct, right? They may not necessarily want to hear everything at once, so the communication needs to be open. Children need to know that it is our job to keep them safe and that we feel competent and secure in doing that. And I talked about their need to know, but at the same time, we need to monitor how much exposure to TV coverage they get, for example. I want to make a point here for play, which is very important. It's not just fun, but it's a key developmental activity for children that can be interrupted in some of these traumas and some of these events, not allowing them to develop socially, motor-wise, and intellectually in ways that the play is meant to help them with. Next slide. In terms of prevention, we actually had a yoga and mindfulness curriculum from K to 8th in the East Palo Alto school district. And this was a study of its implementation, but also a study of its effectiveness. And children that were learning yoga and were learning mindfulness for 3 years improved executive function, their ability to organize information, and also emotion regulation. They were better able to regulate their emotion. And we knew that not only by what they were saying or the behavior they were manifesting, but through brain imaging and also through their sleep patterns. So big impact in being able to provide these types of preventive methods and health at schools. Pure Edge, this was done in collaboration with Pure Edge, and they have a number of brain breaks that we can talk about in the discussion. Next slide. So how do we know when kids need help, right? Well, they need help now, and they all need help. But I want to make a point also that we need to be, we need to approach this in a developmentally appropriate manner. So for example, preschoolers may become more clingy, or they may regress in their behaviors. School-age kids may complain of stomach aches, headaches, they may somatize, while adolescents may become more withdrawn and really wanting to be on their own. So when we see these behaviors, we really know that we need to be attending to this population, and when we see others as well that we can discuss later. Next slide. These are a number of resources. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network has a lot of resources that can be applied in schools, as well as the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. At my program, the Early Life Stress and Resilience Program, we also have a number of resources available, as well as those in the department. I already mentioned Pure Edge. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Dr. Carrion. And next we will hear from Ms. Revelair. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. I would like to thank the Aspen Institute for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. Education is key in how well we adapt to the impact of climate change. And that brings me to our question for today. How can schools adapt to the impacts of climate change? Well, my response is do what schools do best. Educate, inspire, and empower our students with the tools needed to assess, analyze, formulate, and implement solutions, innovative solutions that we may not have even thought of ourselves. And we learn so much when we listen to our students and listen to them intently. Eco Schools, in partnering with schools, are doing an amazing job of giving students a voice. The Ivana Eudorican High School Science Club, and partly in working on their Bronze Award, has worked on their school resiliency design. Next slide. Next, thank you. So it is for the Science Club, they continue to work, and they are eager and they are enthusiastic about being part of the solution. They participate in cleanups all over the island. Additionally, they participated in the International Climate Action Day, and where the club partnered with the Home Depot, who donated palm trees to the school to be planted, and the students gave 150%, and they were eager to go out and plant these trees on the campus, as well as grandparents and other people in the community donating fruit trees as well. And so students learning the importance of planting and reducing their carbon footprint. Next slide, please. In working on the Bronze Award, students worked on this resiliency design, and so came up with 3 achievable goals. And so in part of that short-term goal, what the club came up with was sponsoring a virtual trash bin art competition. And then the medium-term goal would be like to clear the block drains to ensure that the department, the governmental department, have those drains cleared, to ensure that we partner with different groups within the school, to ensure that we are actually being a part of the solution. Additionally, I bring your attention to our long-term goal, which would be to build a rain garden on campus. Next slide, please. And so this is our before and our after picture. So this is the projected rain garden. When it rains, when we suffer from heavy rains, like after hurricanes and so forth, the buildings like further in the back, we would have lots of runoff water, and that would contribute to lower down, because the school is on a slope. But the students have learned from doing and participating in this bronze award and the application with the working on the watershed audit, is that this school, because of its proximity to the ocean, that it is vulnerable to flooding as well, even though you don't necessarily look at it that way. So here is one of solution that the students have come up with to mitigate flooding on the campus. And additionally, it helps to beautify our campus as well. Providing educators with tools, I'm finished with the slides, thank you. Providing educators with tools and opportunities to network with community partners allowed all of us to make inroads in becoming and creating more resilient and green spaces in our community. Listen, we all created this problem, so we must all be a part of the solution. EcoSchools is one organization that draws students into the climate action and climate justice arena in a meaningful way. Students must be empowered and know that saving the planet is also their responsibility. The sooner that they glean this realization, the better it will be for all of us. Student engagement is critical and is at the base of addressing not just climate action and climate justice issues, but also allow students to take ownership of their responsibility in being good environmental stewards. And in doing so, it helps them to become emotionally stable, emotionally balanced, and emotionally resilient, as shared by Dr. Carrie-Ann. Sharing very important information, of which this topic is one, is like sharing a secret with a very young child. The first question they're going to ask is, what? Because they really want to hear what is being shared. So while allowing students to be a part of this conversation will allow them to know that they are important stakeholders. It will give them the opportunity to become more passionate and to think more critically about coming up with innovative ways of addressing our current climate crisis. That secret will be shared broad and wide, and it will be like a spark that starts a fire. And this is exactly what we want: proactive climate activists. And in that short phase, we heard a lot of active words, and that's what we want of our students. We want them to actively engage, and so we must provide them with these opportunities. Video, please.
EcoSchools are helping students be more environmentally conscious.
Thank you. Go back to the beginning. I'll tell you when to play. Thank you. In the Caribbean, there's a cliche that says, children should be seen and not heard. In this conversation, not so. Let's listen.
EcoSchools are helping students be more environmentally conscious. and become advocates for climate justice by being an eco-friendly example, which provides a positive learning environment.
The voices of students like myself are vital to making the future more environmentally friendly.
If schools adopted a curriculum that educates environmental awareness from as early as elementary, students will be able to maintain an eco-friendly environment where they know about reducing their carbon footprints and become advocates for this cause.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. Revelare. I think we all see why you were Teacher of the Year in the Virgin Islands. Let's turn now to Ms. Katz.
Thanks, everybody. It's an honor to be here, to the Aspen Institute, to Governor Whitman, to Secretary King, to Congressman Corbello. It's an honor. So I live in Santa Barbara, California, which sounds like a place that would be completely solarized, I would imagine. It's my hometown, and it actually was the birthplace of Earth Day. After 1969, when we had the massive oil spill, a group of folks, including, is inspired nationally, but we have to do something. And so we have a massive Earth Day celebration here every year, and a third of our community shows up, a third of our 150,000 person community. So we are environmentalists, part of our DNA. We have more environmental nonprofits than any other community per capita. It's a place where we just live and breathe and think about the environment. I say that as a backdrop because I need to tell you that our school system currently is 100% reliant on fossil fuels, 100%. And it's one of the reasons why I ran for the school board. And to back up a little bit, I'm born and raised in Santa Barbara, thankfully. My dad was a professor at UCSB, but I went to Washington after college, and I worked in the Senate, in the Clinton White House. I worked with John Kerry. I actually worked with Al Gore when we passed cap and trade in the House and came close to passing it in the Senate. I worked at Ocean Conservancy for 8 years, the biggest ocean conservation nonprofit. So I come from an environmental national background. And I say that because I always, I tended to think of these fights, and they are sometimes fights, as ideology. Yet now that I've moved back home to raise my son in my hometown, I'm involved in my local schools where I grew up and am an alum, I see that it's really practicality. So I so appreciate that Superintendent Carvalho mentioned incentives several times, because I see now on the ground why a school system in Barbara, California is 100% still reliant on fossil fuels. It's not because of intention or ideology. We have the support of the public here. It's just well-intentioned bureaucrats in the local school system making day-to-day decisions and not prioritizing, and still a stigma of, oh, that's fancy schools. That's for fancy, that's what you do if you have the luxury to make these decisions. Obviously not across the board, but I, as a school board member, encountered way more resistance to sustainability measures than I would have anticipated. So just an example, composting, so of the norm, right? And many of our schools do it, but many don't. And it really is, if a principal, complains that there's a rat problem because of the composting, then he or she can, cancel it. And the students, I so appreciate the voice of the students, because students are light years ahead of where obviously some administrators are just in their day-to-day. And so what I did when I joined the school board in 2016 is I just started working where I could around the edges. With that composting program, we got it back. I started a sustainability committee. It was mostly student driven. Started doing research around surrounding districts, many of whom had bigger challenges when it comes to socioeconomics. And I started doing the research to make that economic argument that we have to start saving money. In our school system, we spend about $1 million a year on energy. And then I started to realize that a lot of school systems, what they've done successfully is to hire a sustainability director, somebody whose job it is to go through the budgets and to sort of be the voice in the room constantly, to say, hey, we should do it this way, or, to do those assessments, to do those audits of water usage, et cetera. I found out, like in Monterey, California, they've saved millions of dollars just by their water use, which is such gold here in California, especially. But I ran into resistance on the board amongst some of the administrators. Again, not from any lack of belief in climate change or lack in belief that it was important, but just prioritization. And so I just kind of became this Johnny One Note on the board with every facility project that would come our way. I'd say, wait a second, where's the opportunity for solar? Wait a second, where's the opportunity for energy efficiency? Are those light bulbs, are they going to be LED? And I'd sort of get, hemming and hawing, and I'm overreaching as a board member and that kind of thing. But then, lo and behold, nature unfortunately intervened, because I really, to be honest, the first 3 years of my first term really made minimal progress, unfortunately, and surprising to me. Coming from a political background, I thought I could kind of get in there and shake things up. But then nature intervened, and unfortunately, we had a massive, massive fire in December of 2017. And then it was followed by a massive amount of rain after a drought. So some of you might remember we had a mudslide actually just 3 years ago, January 9th, 2018. So 2 years ago, excuse me. No, 3 years ago. And we lost 23 lives, and our town was shut down. The highway 101, for those of you who know California, was literally shut down. That's our only artery to and from Santa Barbara for 2.5 weeks. And schools, kids couldn't get to school. So we worked a way to try to do that. And it really became clear to me, as someone who believes that our schools are the cornerstone of our democracy, and they're also the cornerstones of our neighborhoods. I'm glad that food was mentioned at the top here with Superintendent Carvalho, because that's where kids get their food. That's where families can rely on for such food. And now during this pandemic, we see what an important role. I mean, we've all known it, obviously, we're all committed to this, but we see that without kids going to school, what they're actually missing in their lives, what they're missing, and what service that provides for the community. So it took this mudslide with basically our entire community being shut down for us to get then the traction to massively transform our school system into microgrids. And so we're able to make the case that we need, when everything else is shut down from these extreme climate events, we need our schools to have the lights on. We need those kitchens to keep working so that we can continue to feed kids and families. We need this to work. In fact, Office of Emergency of our county did their briefings every day from one of our high school auditorium. And that's where everyone was tuning in on Facebook Live, TV. So they saw, it was really evident to our superintendent at the time and to the administrators that we need to really, this is not just a once, this will happen again, unfortunately. And so we started working then, and we got the momentum that I had been hoping for. And now we have just Tuesday night, we signed and we allocated more of the initial funding at a late night board meeting to massively transform our school system, which currently has one tiny little building of solar. It will soon be 95% reliant on solar with battery storage, with 215 charging stations. And we will go from, like I said, 0% reliant on alternatives to 94% in the matter of about 2.5 years. And we're thrilled, and the students are thrilled. People understand it. It's such an important investment in their future. I can't wait until they can see the construction of those solar panels, because it sends such a signal. The things that they're learning in their environmental studies class, they're seeing actually on their buildings, and knowing that we as a community really care. But so I guess if this is back to Governor Whitman's opening of the recommendations to this incoming administration, I now, having come from a national policy background, see the value of these incentives, because without them, it's so easy for administrators to do the prudent thing that's right in front of them, because they have so much pressure But if they have the incentives, the financial incentives to buy that, get that fleet, as the superintendent was mentioning, of electric buses, as opposed to the less expensive fuel powered buses, then it's hard to make that argument still today in 2021. So incentives is the one word I would put out there from the local level. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, very much. And we'll now go into a question period, but since we're running a little bit over time, we ask people to limit to one question. And if you go into the chat and put the name of the panelist to whom you'd like this question addressed, we'll keep track of that and you'll be called on in order. And then if we don't get to your question, we will follow up with the panelists with that question and try to get back to you or make sure at least we cover that area. I want to start with just a quick one to the superintendent. I'll ask him, what are you doing physically to address with your buildings, with the playgrounds and things? Because in Southern Florida, you are the tip of the spear and having the impacts from sea level rise. So what have you done? What have you been able to do? What more do you need to do to harden your actual physical buildings against climate change impacts?
Thank you, Governor, for the question. Well, number one, the building code for school facilities in Florida is very, very tough since Andrew. And all of our schools are built to hurricane standards. And that's why during times of emergency with a hurricane approaching, they're used also as shelters for our community. The school system is the sheltering entity for the entire county of Miami-Dade. And we can feed, protect, shelter literally thousands upon thousands of individuals. So the constitution of our buildings is quite resilient on the basis of meeting a building code that really builds bunkers. But obviously today, considering new technologies, these are not closed bunkers. There are plenty of windows with solar capability, et cetera. Secondly, as part of, as I mentioned earlier, the $1.2 billion general obligation bond that we passed in 2012, we have made significant upgrades to the infrastructure in all of our school sites. And we have paid particular close attention to the fact that, as the previous speaker mentioned, that all these plans would be reviewed by our own eco-sustainability officer that we appointed a number of years back. And some of the things that we've done are obviously in areas that are prone to flooding, is provide for a higher elevation for the foundation for new school construction. In many instances, many mitigation strategies to reduce flooding in or around the schools with considerable investments, sometimes in partnership with the county or different cities in our community, since the school district is a county system that provides education to 27 different cities and the county as a whole. In addition to that, obviously, we continue to partner, and I'll use Miami Beach as a concrete example, with the city's systemic plan to not only elevate roadways to lead to less flooding, but also to re-engineer and provide a better architecture for new construction. A huge concern in South Florida community, because we are threatened on one hand, on one side, by winds and flooding and storms, but sea level rise gradually and slowly and silently each year is compromising our aquifer, which is subsoil, fresh water. Second to that, that creates an environmental nightmare because a lot of our homes in South Florida community depend on septic tanks. So now there is an intrusion of seawater into the septic tank, which may contaminate our aquifer. And as a result of that, we are in partnership with a number of cities to actually come up with mitigation strategies to replace septic tanks, to elevate them, or to replace them with new technologies. I'll mention one additional thing, because I think in addition to your question, Governor, there was a point that was made. I keep emphasizing all of these propositions are expensive. And that's why I emphasize the idea of state and federal incentives that will reduce long-term our reliance on fossil fuel products, but also will decrease the long-term operational costs of our school systems. And by the way, that starts with us. I'll give you one last example. We created our own incentive program with principals. Just imagine 466 schools. We generated dashboards that actually measure on a daily basis energy consumption and water consumption in every single school. And the dial, red lines or green lights, the average consumption as opposed to the district-wide consumption. Every principal is given a goal with a specific benchmark, and if they meet it or exceed it, guess what? There's a reinvestment from the savings from utility back to the school to be invested in educational programs.
Thank you very much, Secretary King.
Thanks, Governor. Dr. Carrion, I'd love your thoughts on how you ensure that students stay hopeful about climate issues. You know, I worry about students sort of getting depressed as a result of hearing about how significant the threats are and then seeing firsthand these dramatic climate events. How do you keep students feeling positive?
Yes, thank you. Well, students don't want to be just passive consumers. They really want to be part of the solution. And I think one thing that we can do is to take advantage of the brain power that we have in our educational system with the educators and the students and engage them in local and national competitions, not only of projects that would address climate change, but also on methods for dissemination and technical assistance for those districts that need it. I agree with the superintendent, these are all very expensive propositions, but we need to prioritize education in this country. Many of the racial and political problems that we have, I believe, come as a consequence of not prioritizing education. So we need to increase the budget, the national budget for education, and provide not only incentives, but resources for all of them.
Thanks so much. Governor Markell?
Yes, thanks. And good to see everybody. And my main interest is in how the panelists see us being able to drive public advocacy in support of these kinds of changes, because without that, nothing else happens. I mean, if the policymakers feel some pressure to move, it's a lot more likely that they are going to move. So that's always sort of my interest in how they see at the ground level this kind of change really taking place, and the advocacy making sure that it takes place. Maybe Laura can address that.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I would have given a different answer before being on the school board. I would have said it, you know, it's more about the elected leaders, and certainly it is. But it's also just, it's the principals, and it is that it's the teachers. I mean, it's really installing an ethos, looking for leaders on very local levels that will champion and be champions and be the kind of teacher that we have there. So, I mean, I think certainly, obviously, there's a role for elected officials. I'm one of them, and the higher up you go, there's more, you know, more ability for incentives and programs and things like that. But it's just really, it does, when you're coming to education, just it is so localized, and that's really just, for example, we just hired a new superintendent, and never before had questions of commitment to sustainability been asked in that hiring process. And so because I was able to run the process, that then became what, you know, a major question and a conversation that we had. And so we do now have a true champion in our next superintendent.
Thanks. You know, one of the things I found in office was that students themselves, the young people, particularly on environmental issues, were probably more effective advocates than anybody else. And,
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Good point.
Thanks. Megan?
Hi, Michelle, thanks for an excellent panel. This sort of builds on the previous question, I guess, but I really have two questions. So first, I'm super impressed with kind of the comprehensive approach here. I really appreciate the, we should be doing this all across K-12. This is not a unit in our high school, or we should teach it in 5th grade. And I guess one of my questions also is, how did you get there to that comprehensive view? And to what extent do you think there's a baseline literacy more broadly in your districts that are necessary for this? And so often we hear champions, and I appreciate champions, but it is sounding a little to me like you all must have a pretty deep bench in various capacities to get there. So that's part A of my question. And then part B of my question is, the financial modeling for this seems like a very actionable kind of thing that we could be including in federal incentives that says school leaders need to go through professional development to understand longer term budget financing that gives modeling possibilities with different kinds of choices. That's we could enlist a whole bunch of computer programmers to create new budgeting model tools for our school systems, probably like that, around this sort of a thing. And I guess I'm curious about that as a form of literacy that is, it sounds like it was a forced literacy for you all, but I'm curious about how that has shifted and may continue to shift.
I'll give you a 30-second answer. Number one, I believe you're right. It takes a champion to begin with to initially lead, to plant the seed of curiosity and to develop, quite frankly, the master plan for implementation. But then you need the tribe to follow, right? You need the believers to actually be convinced. And that's where the permanence of leadership. So I've been superintendent for 12 years, which is nearly impossible. Ask Secretary King to be superintendent of a large school, urban school system for 12 years. We've had the chance to actually pollinate these ideas, discuss them with the community, get a groundswell of support from parents and teachers, get the philanthropic community together, convene the chambers of commerce, recognize the value add benefit, not only to the school system, but to everybody. And then there's an easier buying in process. Secondly, we were determined in developing or acquiring curriculum, in developing standards, developing expectations, implementing them, and ensuring that the monitoring that they are being implemented is there. To Board Member Cap's point, you may have great plans, but if they're not monitored, they're probably not being implemented. And lastly, I think that students get excited about these types of initiatives when they are meaningful and relevant to them, when they believe that they are part of it and there's a benefit at some point to them. And that's why we approach this issue from all angles. Now, it's not perfect, but I think it's well-oiled, it's mature, and it's second nature. It's not that we have to think to do the right thing happens.
And I would like to add to that, that going back to the student voice, in conversation when I had the last science club meeting, one of the students shared about curriculum, and that she listened to her kindergarten sibling learn all about the different presidents and all of that. So from her perspective, why then not embed in our curriculum to teach students, even from kindergarten, about climate action and the need for us to be able to address these issues? Additionally, when students, in terms of meeting pair, I've had young climate activists come into the classroom who have been, in a similar, I teach high school, in a similar age category as the students, and they embrace what they share with them because they can connect with them because they're in the same age category. And so they inspire and spark the interest and want to champion these causes as well.
Thank you. I want to turn now to Vic Barrett.
Hi, I had a question for Michelle Rose in particular. I really loved hearing about what you were saying. and I have some Caribbean roots too, so it's really exciting. But based on the work that you did, it seems that the students really had to understand like shared ownership and responsibility to protect the land and to protect their school. And do you think that the students inherently had a lot of that understanding, being young and being encouraged with, and being interested in science and in climate change? Or do you think that there had to be intentional teaching moments to sort of encourage those ideals and values of wanting to like step up for the greater good, basically?
Well, I would say that in terms of like the students who come to me, because I chair a science club, and I've had where there are 44 students in that club. And our population right now is about 700. Before it was like 1,000. So students, I believe that they truly have this inherent part of them that they truly care about the environment, but they need to know that they truly have a voice. And what they say and how they feel, that it really counts. And so bringing in different expertise people from, different, like the meteorologists, those who do flood mitigation mapping, so that they could be able to have the tools now to be able to intelligently contribute to the conversation and to look for viable solutions to these problems.
Thanks so much. Well, we had more questions that we couldn't get to because we had such a good conversation. I just want to thank our fantastic panelists for sharing their experience and insights with us. And please know that we will continue to follow up with you as we frame recommendations from the commission. So thank you for your leadership on these issues. Governor Whitman?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that and just say thank you to all the panelists and thank you to all of those who have been on YouTube or watching it wherever they are. We're now going to go into these private sessions, the breakout sessions, limited to commissioners only. But as the secretary said, as Secretary King said, we will follow up on all those questions you have. So thanks everyone for being part of this. It's been a really good discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.